Hello and welcome to another Magic Duels video. Since the Battle for Zendikar expansion has been out for a while and everyone has had the time to play around with all the new cards, I would like to discuss my top 10 cards from the Battle for Zendikar expansion that have had the biggest impact on the game so far. So let's get started here with our number 10 on the list, which is Amna, Locus of Rage. He's a very powerful finisher in all the red-green ramp decks, as he also synergizes very nicely with Landfall, making all your future ramp spells still relevant, making an elemental token whenever a land enters a battlefield, but he also happens to work very nicely with all the elemental creatures that are already in the red-green ramp decks, since whenever an elemental dies, Omnath will deal 3 damage to target creature or player. And we also see Omnath make some appearances in the Reanimator style decks, where you can get Omnath out on turn 4 or 5, making him a very deadly creature to deal with, especially in combination with fetch lands like Evolving Wilds, making multiple tokens with just one land. Next up we have Woodland Wanderer, which is one of the biggest creatures that you can get out in the early stages of the game, since thanks to Converge you can have up to a 6/6 with Vigilance and Trample, which plays offense and defense very well, so against the aggressive decks he's a giant brick wall that can still apply pressure, and against the more controlling decks that run Planeswalkers for example, he can ignore all those chump blocking Gatecreeper Vines and go straight for their loyalty, so that makes Woodland Wanderer a number 9 on our list. Next up is Seraph of Stagnation, which is one of the many Eldrazi on this list. And for 6 mana we get some decent stats that can apply pressure and play defense very well, but of course what makes the Seraph of Stagnation so powerful is his ability that whenever an opponent plays a land, you get to draw 2 cards, so the opponent either has to remove the Seraph of Stagnation right away, or they have to stop playing lands, otherwise they fall behind on card advantage too much. And this makes the Seraph of Stagnation especially powerful against all the green ramp decks, since they kind of have to play their lands in order to cast their finishers, and green isn't really known for its removal, so they will have a pretty hard time beating a resolved Seraph of Stagnation, so that makes the Sire our number 8 on the list. And next up is Scatter to the Winds, which is a 3 mana hard counter, which the game didn't really have before. Our best option previously was Calculated Dismissal, which in the late game got a lot worse, but Scatter to the Winds can counter anything at any point in a game, and for some additional mana you can also awaken a land to apply some extra pressure on the opponent, so that gives Scatter to the Winds the number 7 spot on our list. At number 6 we have to cheat a little bit, since we're gonna include multiple cards in the same slot, and those are all the lands that Battle for Zendikar has given us. This includes the battle lands that come into play untapped if you control 2 basic lands, and also of course the creature lands, Shambling Vent and Lumbering Falls. These lands help us make 3, 4 and even 5 color decks a lot more easily, since they provide much needed mana fixing. And the battle land cycle also happens to synergize very nicely with the check land cycle, which was already in the game, since of course the battle lands count as basic land types, so the check lands will come into play untapped if the corresponding battle land is already in play. Next up we have Oblivion Sewer, which is another very powerful mythic Eldrazi creature that can slot in multiple decks thanks to his colorless mana cost. For 6 mana we get 5 power and 8 toughness, and we also get a shot at the opponent's lands, can help us ramp into even bigger things if that's what we're into. Oblivion Sewer being an Eldrazi means we can search him up with an enchantment like From Beyond, so that makes Oblivion Sewer number 5 on our list. At number 4 we find Planar Outburst, which is gonna be an unconditional sweeper most of the time. We already had access to cards like Languish, Chandra's Ignition or Tragic Arrogance, but those sweepers don't always take care of the problem at hand, especially when it comes to larger creatures. So now Planar Outburst finally gives us that unconditional sweeper that we needed, and if you happen to have a deck that plays a lot of the Awaken cards, Planar Outburst might even be a one-sided sweeper, which is even better than an unconditional one. Next up is Gideon, ally of Zendikar, which is a very powerful planeswalker that is hard to deal with, since he can protect himself so well by making 2/2 ally tokens every turn. He can also turn into a creature himself to apply even more pressure, or he can make an emblem to give all your creatures +1/+1 indefinitely. Gideon of course is very powerful in the ally decks, since the token he makes is an ally, which will trigger all the rally abilities of your allies in play, and he also works nicely in the token decks, since his emblem giving all your creatures +1/+1 is very powerful if you have multiple creatures out. So that gives Gideon the number 3 spot on our list. At number 2 we find another Planeswalker in Obnixilis Reignited. For 5 mana we get access to an unconditional removal spell, which is already what we had to pay for an unconditional removal spell in black previously, but now a Planeswalker will stick around to provide card advantage at the cost of a few life points, which is definitely worth it, and then of course if he gets to ultimate he can also close out the game pretty quickly. That leads us to the number 1 card from Battle for Zendikar with the highest impact, and that is Lamacq, the Ceaseless Hunger. You can't really go more high impact than Lamacq, since for 10 mana you get to exile 2 permanents and still have a 10/10 indestructible creature that will close out the game in 2 attacks no matter what, and of course Lamacq being an Eldrazi means we get to search him up with From Beyond, giving us essentially 3 copies of the Eldrazi Titan in our green decks. Alright, so this concludes my list of the top 10 most important cards from Battle for Zendikar. Be sure to let me know in the comments if I've missed any important cards, or if you disagree with some of the rankings in the list. But for now, I wanna thank you for watching, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and as always, have a nice day.